Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Welcome back. I'm going to go around and say our names, and then I'll introduce Sean, our speaker for today. I'm George.
Ruth. Alex. Jen. Jeff.
Andre.
Stephen.
Matthew. Bob.
I'm Brad. Jack.
Susan.
My name's Cass. Ricky. Jim. Andy. Tony. My name is Mark.
Thank you. And welcome everyone online. I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Sean Feit Oakes. He, him, queer, Puerto Rican, and English ancestry, living on unceded Pomo land in Northern California. Teaches Buddhism and somatic practice focusing on the integration of meditation, trauma resolution, and social justice. He received teaching authorization from Jack Kornfield and wrote his dissertation on extraordinary states in Buddhist meditation and experimental dance. He teaches at Spirit Rock Meditation Center, East Bay Meditation Center, Insight Timer, and locally. Learn more at https://seanoakes.com. Thank you, Sean, and welcome. He's also going to be at our retreat in another month or so, so please come.
Come on retreat. Yay. Hey, everybody. Good to see you. Blessings of an early springtime here in the Bay Area. And folks online, good to see you wherever you are calling in from. I'm Sean Oakes. I use he and him. They also sometimes, particularly holding in my heart, a local tragedy in the trans community this week in my area up here in Western Sonoma County, and broadly just the unfolding nature of oppression and safety and danger in the trans community broadly in this country right now. So compassion and protection. And for everyone calling in here from your various places and your various identities, your various positionalities and social locations, you're welcome. All of you is welcome here. And it's a pleasure to be here again with the GBF. So, So I said, as I was, as we were kind of warming up or, getting ready to go here, I asked, what have people been talking about? What's been the vibe and the mood and the tone in the Sangha lately? What should I talk about? And Jeff said, shit's going down. So he did not actually say that. But he said, things are very intense. There's a lot of stress, and what do we do with that? How do we deal with that? And the implication a bit was things are stressful in the political, geopolitical, social realm. But of course, stress is a pretty good translation of dukkha, which is one of the characteristic qualities of existence, the human realm, the animal realm, the realm of sentient beings, which you are all participating in at the moment. We all are. And so let's see what we can do that offers some some framework, some guidance in this moment that we find ourselves in. So I'm going to reference a discourse of the Buddhas from the Connected Discourses, Samyutta Nikaya 325. For folks online, there it is in the chat. And we can drop a link into the description online for you to look up later. It's always great to go back and read the discourse later, but I'll reference this a bit as we go forward. So one of the Buddha's supporters, a faithful disciple, a lay disciple, was a king named Pasenadi of the local kingdom of Kosala. And so one day the Buddha is at his monastery in Savatthi, and the king comes to see him, as he often did. The Buddha says, "Great king, where are you coming from in the middle of the day?" And the king says, again, as a way of describing what he's doing, he says, "Sir, there are anointed aristocratic kings who are infatuated with authority and obsessed with greed for sensual pleasures. They have attained stability in the country, occupying a vast conquered territory. Today, I have been fulfilling the duties of such kings." So he's a king. He is an anointed aristocratic king. He speaks in a funny way about the duties of the kingship. He says, there are these kings who are obsessed with greed, who've conquered a great, kingdom. I've been doing the duties of such kings, right? He doesn't say I am obsessed with greed, but he says I've been fulfilling the duties of such kings. You might be aware of some kings or, people who wish they were kings in the world right now, possibly anointed, possibly aristocratic, certainly wealthy, obsessed with greed for sensual pleasures, who have attained stability in the country, maybe, occupying a vast conquered territory. There are a number of folks in the world occupying a vast conquered territory, obsessed with greed for sensual pleasures. And so this is a person that you find in the world. This is a person who has been common in the world ever since there was such a thing as territory to be conquered, and kings to be anointed. It's potentially not useful here to, think of specific greedy kings as being an anomaly in the human situation. It's appropriate here, and I think part of what we can hear in Pasenadi's description here is that there are these kinds of people in the world, and there have kind of always been, and this is a feature of the world. It's not wrong that these people exist. If it were wrong that these people exist, that would be a way of saying that it's wrong that greed exists. And that doesn't make sense in the Buddha's understanding. Greed is a feature of the realm of difference. And when there are existent beings, there's going to be difference. When there's difference, there is comparison and judgment. And when there's comparison and judgment, there is violence and domination. And so, the Buddha does not put forth a discourse, a teaching that power is wrong. What he says is that greed causes harm and pain, that folks obsessed with greed for sensual pleasures, greed for power, what they do is they cause harm. And because greed gives rise to unethical action, essentially, right? Like if you don't control greed, it causes harmful action to unfold. And so this is we might say a natural feature of our existence. What do we do about this? Right? So let's go on with Pasenadi and the Buddha. Pasenadi just says, there are these kings. And he kind of says, like, I'm one of them, but he says, at least I am fulfilling the duties of such kings. I'm doing my job. And I like that, he's doing his job. He's a faithful, devotee of the Buddha. So in the middle of the day, in the middle of the workday, he stops off at a park to visit his teacher. May you all have such luxury in your workday. You're halfway across San Francisco on some errand for your job, and you're like, I'm just going to duck into the temple for a little, cup of tea with my Dharma friends. Like, that's what Pasanati is doing. So then the Buddha says, gives him a simile. This is the simile of the mountain. This is a famous warning from the Buddha. He says, what do you think, great king? Suppose a trustworthy and dependable man were to come from the east. He'd approach you and say, please, great king, you should know this. I come from the east. There I saw a huge mountain that reached the clouds, and it was coming this way, crushing all creatures. So then, great king, do what you must. But then a trustworthy and dependable man were to come from the west, and a third from the north, and a fourth from the south, and they all say, there's a great mountain that reaches the clouds, and it's coming this way, crushing all creatures. Then, great king, do what you must. Should such a dire threat arise, a terrible loss of human life when human birth is so rare, really a loss of all, animal life, when a good birth is so rare, what would you do? And so the Buddha poses this impossible, question to a king. There's a threat coming from all sides that can't be stopped. It's a mountain that reaches the clouds. Nothing you can do, nothing your army can do, nothing your power as a king can do. And it's coming from all sides. There's nowhere to flee to. Right? And I'm of course thinking about climate change when I hear about a crushing force coming from all sides that can't be stopped. It's not exactly the same. There's a lot that can be done about climate, but the simile is really pointing to, like, what do you do or in relation to, an unstoppable threat? And the king, a good practitioner, he says, sir, what could I do but practice the teachings, practice morality, doing skillful and good actions? Right? So he says, if you can't escape, then the best thing to do is to be ethical, is to be good. He doesn't give the nihilistic, hedonist answer. Death is coming, so we should just let's just have a party, whatever. Right? That's a reasonable response, to some, except that, it doesn't really care for beings, there's this way that one of the informal roles, one of the ways that the American presidency is sometimes described informally, usually after big disasters, is as the consoler in chief. I like this role, the consoler in chief. We've occasionally had a good one, right? Every once in a while. One of these men, so far they've all been men, manages to not just be obsessed with greed for sensual pleasures and power, but actually manages to manifest the kind of generous, compassionate humanity that he can actually be a consoler in chief, can speak in a way that is comforting, it's uplifting, that has some wisdom to it, to people who are grieving or afraid. And I think Pasanati is pointing to this, as king, what would he do? He would care for people as best he could in the presence of this oncoming disaster. So then the Buddha says to him, so he says, like, what could I do? But, practice morality, practice the teaching. So practice the Dhamma, deal with your mind. Partly the implication here is there's an understanding already in the field between the Buddha and Pasanati and the monks and nuns that are gathered, the lay people gathered. Because Pasanati is already a devotee of the Buddha and has already heard the Dhamma, Pasanati has already accepted the Buddha's teachings on rebirth. which were not universal in the Buddha's day. Not everyone thought about what happens after we die in the same way. But for the Buddha, his experience and vision and wisdom led him to teach that the karmic stream that animates us in this present life continues beyond this life, so long as there is unfinished business. That unfinished business being the results of actions, intentions, and their results. As long as there's still wanting, as long as there's still greed, hatred, and delusion, as long as there's still the sense of a self that wants something, then there will be a rebirth into some kind of body, human, animal, spirit, some very privileged, some very wounded, suffering. So Pasenadi knows this and knows that, this is the main reason why the nihilistic hedonist answer doesn't work. To say, let's just, throw caution to the wind and, the mountains are coming, fuck it. Let's just party, right? Because you're not actually tending your future life. You're going to be reborn. And to be reborn in a way that's going to be beneficial, more pleasurable, more possibility to practice the teachings and liberate the heart, even if you knew the mountain was coming and was going to crush you tomorrow, purifying the heart and mind today, entering into the beautiful states of love and compassion, of joy and equanimity, of insight and wisdom, of care for each other. That's the way to spend your last days, because you're setting yourself, there's going to be more days, right? The end of this body is not the end of your adventure. And so if you bring your mind into unwholesome states, even if you only have a few days to live, that's just setting up your future in the next birth to be unwholesome, less likely to be well. And so whatever you make of this model of what happens after we die, however you hold that yourself, whether you hold it as a myth or a metaphor or a material reality or a mystical reality or whatever, what it points to is a thing that we can observe all around us in nature, which is that life continues through the birth and death cycle. And so, when a diseased tree dies and it spreads disease in the forest, that tree is gone. That individual tree, whatever that means, in a deeply interconnected mycelial network and in the interconnection of the forest, maybe that one tree is dead, but a diseased tree has a profound impact on the forest around it. Where a healthy tree, rots, is also gone as an individual tree, again, whatever individual means here, but can have a very beneficial effect on the world around it. So, when an unwholesome person, passes away, the unwholesomeness that they brought into the world through their actions actually continues, right? And you could think of some people who have died, and the unwholesomeness of their actions is absolutely still felt, right? I'm sure you could instantly come up with examples of that. And so the king knows this, and he says, practice the Dhamma and practice, being ethical, care for people. So then the Buddha, gives him the underlying teaching and says, I tell you, great king, I announce to you, old age and death are advancing upon you. Since old age and death are advancing upon you, what would you do? Sir, what can I do but practice the teachings, practice morality, doing skillful and good actions? First layer of this simile is that old age and death are these mountains, right? They can't be avoided. They're crushing everybody. They crush all creatures. What to do? So going on. So Pasenadi says, okay, so I would, I'm faithful. I would practice the teachings, practice morality. But then Pasenadi goes on. He says, sir, there are, repeats his earlier phrase, anointed aristocratic kings with great authority who are infatuated with authority, obsessed with greed for sensual pleasures. They've attained stability in the country, occupying a vast conquered territory. But then Pasenadi goes on and he adds to this story of what these kings are doing. And he says, such kings engage in battles of elephants, cavalry, chariots, infantry, but there is no place, no domain for such battles when old age and death are approaching. So now Pasenadi brings in this deeper complication. Like, okay, what about the struggles of the world, the geopolitical struggles, like, oh, old age and death are approaching. Should I, as a king, like engage in some battle with my elephants and cavalry, conquering more of more territory? There's no place for violence. Like, why would you do that? The mountains are coming in, crushing, as if you could say like, oh, what if there were like, two countries, they're at battle, and there's mountains coming in from all sides, crushing them. Would it make sense for those two warring countries to keep battling, even as the mountains are rolling in, crushing them? Pasenadi goes on. In this royal court, there are ministers of wise counsel who are capable of dividing an approaching enemy by wise counsel, right? Diplomatic war, right? You could send your diplomats in to like divide up the enemy, to cause internal dissension. I'm going to keep not naming names, but what's happening in the world right now. And you can see examples of this as well, And Pasenadi says, but there's no place, no domain for such diplomatic battles when old age and death are advancing. Then he goes on. So we've got, he's really understanding, how do you think about like war and, violent conflict, but also how do you think about, Cold War, diplomatic conflict in the face of such, old age and death, the mountains. Then he goes on. In this royal court, there is abundant gold, both coined and uncoined, stored in dungeons and towers. Using this wealth, we can bribe an approaching enemy. But there is no place, no domain for such monetary battles when old age and death are approaching. Right. So there's the warring kings, there's the diplomatic kings, there's the economic battling kings, and when old age and death are approaching, what can I do but practice the teachings? And the Buddha just loves this. He says, that's so true, great king, so true. And he, at the end of it, he just repeats the same thing that the king has said in verse. You suppose there were vast mountains of solid rock pushing the sky, drawing in from all sides, crushing the four quarters. So too age and death advance upon all living creatures, crushing all between them. There's nowhere for elephants to take a stand, nor chariots nor infantry. They can't be defeated, the mountains, by diplomatic battles or by wealth. That's why an astute person, seeing what's good for themselves, being wise, would place faith in the Buddha, the teaching, and the Sangha. Whoever lives by the teaching in body, speech, and mind is praised in this life and departs to rejoice in heaven. Remember that heaven in the Buddha's teachings is not a permanent salvation. It's just a temporary, really lovely rebirth that you can have. So this simile is what came to mind when I was asked, like, what to say about living in a time of great trouble, of great violence, of great oppression, of deep social unrest. How do we think about finding a life of, more ease, less stress right now? And so this is one answer from the Buddha. This is one answer that says, have perspective, like really, understand that in the face of old age and death, there's, it puts everything into perspective, right? It says, remember old age and death, and knowing that death is coming, knowing that your rebirth is coming, practice the Dhamma. One way we could interpret this is to, turn away from the news, turn away from the media, go on retreat or go to your cushion. I was going to say go to your room, but I have a 9-year-old. Go to your room. Practice the Dhamma. And this is appropriate. We don't need to be on the front lines of the social war all the time. You don't need to be an activist all the time, even especially if you're a professional activist. Actually, really set it down. Get to the cushion. But if you're not a professional activist and you're just a news obsessed, person who can't put the larger story down, as many of us are, then, the encouragement here is, remember in what King Pasenadi is saying, it's not just, practice morality, do good actions, which could be, voting, calling your representative, participating in the community around you, taking care of people, protecting oppressed populations. But it's also practice the teachings, right? Remember meditation. Don't abandon your practice in a crisis. So there's two sides to this, and there always is in the Buddha's teaching. One is to remember the internal. So remember your own state of heart and mind. Remember to care for your states, right? Am I carrying around resentment or anger or bitterness or fear for myself or others? You might say, the fear that I feel is appropriate because this is a time when people are being threatened and attacked. My friends are being threatened and attacked. Communities I care about are being threatened and attacked. And from a Dharma perspective, we might say that concern is appropriate, compassion is appropriate, vigorous action in defense of people who are under threat is appropriate. Is fear and distress in my own heart necessary for that? Right? Can we actually practice in a way to, bring our own hearts to some balance, a bit every day so that we can then be in the world in a way that is helpful? If you're King Pasenadi and the mountain is crushing, in from all sides, is it going to help? Is it going to be appropriate kingship if you just get freaked out and run around screaming like, oh no, or I hate this. I wish this wasn't happening. To be lost in reactivity doesn't help, actually. And so, part of the beauty and the power of what is sometimes called a wheel-turning king, right? What Pasenadi is aspiring to be is that, a responsible king, or someone in any position of authority to care for others, it's part of their nobility is that they keep their head, is that they can keep their heart clear and tend the people around them, And so that takes practice for pretty much all of us. So the internal part of dealing with being in a stressful world is around taking care of our states. How do you bring your own heart out of alarm, out of reactivity, out of freaking out, and into something like balance? Orient to the immediacy around you. Orient to the immediate people around you, right? Yes, there's a crisis in, lots of places. There's a crisis in DC. There's a crisis in Ukraine. There's a crisis in Gaza. There's a crisis in Sudan. There are little crises all over the place and, big crises all over the place. And look to your right, look to your left. Here's somebody who's heartbroken because their parent is dying. Here's somebody who is heartbroken because, a kid at their school is really suffering. Here's somebody who is afraid, for, that they'll be deported or their friends are being deported or, the world. Part of this medicine is to stay local, There's also medicine to get really global and be like, yeah, I'm also, tracking what's happening and I'm staying vocal and, but I'm bleeding into the second half, right? The first half is tend your own heart, tend your own states. The second side of that equation is to not be deluded into thinking that we can just, tend our own garden and ignore the world. This is in a certain way perhaps harder now than it was in the time of Pasenadi and the Buddha, because in the time of Pasenadi and the Buddha, there was not, there wasn't the idea that the people of a kingdom had that much of a say in how the king governed. The king is the king. You do your thing, and you just kind of hope that you get a good king. Like you hope that your king is Pasenadi and not the neighboring king, Ajatasattu, who was one of those obsessed with sensual pleasures and war and conquering everybody and killed his own father. Classic kind of Middle Ages Shakespearean king. You just hope that you get one of the good ones, and then you go about your life. And now we have this idea called democracy, which, by the way, Socrates thought was kind of like the second worst sort of form of governing. But anyway, it's what we've got. And it's better than some other forms around right now. But it comes with this interesting idea that all of us as ordinary citizens of the realm have a responsibility and some degree of power in determining how things go. And this is partly wonderful, right? We get to vote for representatives and rulers. And it's partly a lot of pressure. It suggests to us that it's important to stay engaged in what's going on at the court, 3,000 miles away or whatever. And so, with the power of voting for folks and the government maybe being responsive, there's also, the responsibility to do that well. The most substantial critiques of democracy from Socrates to the present day are that most people don't have the education and wisdom to vote well. You want to trust people to vote for your rulers, and then you put a huge number of people under the conditions of poor education and lots of propaganda, and they're not going to vote very well, and folks on all sides of the political divide think this, right? Folks look at conservatives and say good God, the people they're voting for. And conservatives look at progressives like, good God, the people they're voting for, This is a classic critique of democracy. But the deeper critique in contemporary democracy is that, that the thing that is really voting is money. And so we're back to the greed-obsessed kings using their wealth to move power around and to acquire power. And in the face of that, what we have is a relatively, degrade. It's certainly not a pure democracy in the way that Socrates was imagining, but we have a democracy where money is really what holds power. And of course, we can see that now in all of the major democracies in the world in different ways. The Buddha is fierce around money. This is the only religion that I know of that actually identifies greed as the heart of all evil. The Christian tradition understands it a little bit. Someone actually posted on social media recently, a Christian pastor posted to one of the billionaires who's currently having too much influence in the American government, naming him by name and saying, if you were that camel, you would be like a mile-wide camel, referencing that line in the Bible that says that it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. The Buddha is not just critical of wealth in the way that Jesus was, understanding that wealth gives rise to unethical action, basically, right? But the Buddha understands that it's not just wealth, that causes poor ethics, poor choices, but that deep in the human heart, and really in the sentient being heart. So it's true for spirit beings, it's true for animals, it's true for humans, but it's particularly catastrophic for humans at the moment, that the quality of greed, not just basic wanting, but how deep in our system, ordinary hunger, like wanting to be well fed today and protected from danger, how quickly that metastasizes into wanting more and more and more and taking more than I need. The Buddha was fiercely critical of greed that wants more than it needs. So that even when somebody becomes a monastic and you renounce, family and business and wealth and using money, and you're down to one outfit and one meal a day, there's a saying in the monastic world that until you actually realize the truth of the teachings, you're a debtor. You're in debt because you're being gifted the alms, that daily meal by the lay people. You're being gifted it, but you haven't actually realized the teachings. And so you're in debt. And the only way to pay off that debt is to actually liberate the heart for yourself and all beings. And so people in the discourses will say, when they liberate the heart, when they realize freedom, they'll say, up to this day, I was a debtor living off the alms food of the country. But now I've repaid that debt. To really understand how deeply greed moves in the world is meant to inspire us, not just to, deal with stress in our heart, but to actually change how we think about existence, to actually shift us toward understanding human life in a completely different way, and to look, fiercely and critically at any moment in our life where this ancient, force called Mara, sometimes the deceiver, has a grip on our heart. Anytime you feel that rise of I just want things to go my way. I want what I want. And there's this moment, right? There's this moment when I want something, but I still am profoundly committed to loving kindness and compassion and well-being, that I want what I want in the right amount. I want to be well fed, but I don't want to hurt others. I want to be cared for, but I don't want to oppress others. I want to feel safe, but I don't want my safety to be at the expense of the safety of someone else. That's like a wholesome, balanced middle way, if we can find it in this world of consumption and, the marketplace and violence and politics. But you can feel these moments where your heart kind of falls over that edge into like, I want to be safe and I'm okay if those other people are hurt. You fall over the edge into like, I hate what's happening so much that I'm wishing harm on those others, and we want to find somehow in ourselves this extraordinary shift toward both like the inner side of the shift is really held in the word renunciation, which is a frightening word for some of us, but it's really like, can I settle into having enough, not needing more, including like not needing things to go my way all the time, but can I have enough? And in the external, renunciation is like a deep, deep compassion for others. How do we care for beings in a moment like this? How do you choose the issue that you're going to speak out on and really speak out on it? How do you feel into a community that you want to care for, and just say, like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to figure out how to do this. I'm going to lean into trying to care for trans kids or, folks at the border or choose your people, right? And choosing your people is just a way of saying that we don't have infinite energy. From a Dharma perspective, you want to say, how do I care for all beings? And particularly the difficult ones. How do I care for the folks who are really happy about what's going on right now, or who are really upset about what's going on right now, who really don't agree with me politically? How do I care for the people doing terrible evil right now? Right? And this is what's remarkable in the Buddhist tradition. There are no enemies in the Dhamma. There's only the force of greed and the force of delusion warping human hearts into doing harm. But someone who's doing harm is simply someone who has been warped by conditions, traumatized, wounded. It's true for all of us, and it's true for the most evil people on the planet. How do you hold them in compassion while stopping their harm as best you can? And so we have this weave all the time, right there in what Pasanati said, practice the teachings, live ethically, care for beings, care for your own state internally and your future state, understand old age and death, understand our relationship to what goes beyond old age and death, and care for the beings around us, care for their kingdom, care for each other, and figure out how to live in the world without hating those who are themselves wounded and causing harm. So we'll pause there for now. Thank you. Blessings. We have a bit of time here for a few questions, any responses.
Bob.
Thank you for stimulating lots of thoughts about it. You sort of intimated this is possible, but I'd like to hear more about the idea of resisting the people who are showing such greed and affecting others so negatively, that we can peacefully resist and perhaps be able to show other people how to resist peacefully and minimize the effects that these, you use the word evil, people are having on us. I don't hear resistance ever talked about in Buddhism.
Yeah. How do you peacefully resist? How do you harm reduce? I think what the Dharma has to offer us is really about the states of heart and mind that support peaceful resistance. The states of generosity of heart, of compassion. The art of peaceful resistance is well established in the activist world, in the world of nonviolent resistance. Buddhist and Dharma approaches to social action, of course, mostly support nonviolent approaches. So there's that. Find trainings in nonviolent protest, find groups of activists and folks resisting whose values you feel like you can support. I think part of what we'll find here is that, there are well-established playbooks for how to resist authoritarianism or how to, do social action of various kinds. From the Dharma side, what you're looking for is folks who share your values, and those values are going to play out in their tactics. So, if the tactic is, boycott, big evil corporations, I can get down with that, right? If the tactic is, car bomb the CEOs of those corporations, I can't get behind that, There's lots of ways to take social action. And, so you could start with folks who are, inside or, adjacent to the Buddhist world, like the Buddhist Peace Fellowship. you could, or other groups who are nonviolent and, fellow travelers, like the Quakers, for nonviolence. But you could also just go out and see who's doing what, and mostly I would say, like, start with, like, find where you're passionate. You can't fight on all issues at once. So figure out an issue where you're passionate, and then do your homework. See, like, who's doing what in this field. And you'll find, some are going to be more violent or more, maybe they use a kind of speech that you don't like using, and then you don't work with them, right? You don't like their tactics. You find someone whose tactics you feel like, oh, I could participate in this. I could support this. It's, within my values. And then you're in the activist world. You don't need the Dharma to tell you how to put together a good protest. There's good folks who have studied that. But the thing that's important for me is that we are always holding, this is Pasanati really saying, like, what to do, but practice the Dhamma, that you hold your values, as foremost. So, the ends never justify the means. If that means that, you're essentially saying, I'm sacrificing my own peacefulness of heart and the goodness of my future, because I have to cultivate hatred. And, you can totally come up with an example that would be really painful. You could say, okay, I'm in a village in a war zone, and the only options are take up a gun and fight, or what? And, like, of course, right? The human realm includes situations of such tremendous horror that, that these choices are tremendously difficult. And so, that's okay, right? Because that's real. Nobody has a right to not be in a war zone. There's no such thing in the universe as human rights, like, the world is violent and awful. And sometimes that awfulness comes to your doorstep. But if you have the privilege to not have to make such a terrible choice as that, use that privilege to protest and resist and act in a way that continues to support, the well-being in your own heart and, nonviolence in your communities.
Two things that I'm doing, decided I could do. There are organizations out there that follow what you're describing now, and I give money to them to support their ethics.
Yeah.
And I also writing letters to legislative people expressing what I feel is right. It's simple, it's doable, it's nonviolent.
Yeah.
I don't know how to encourage more people to do that, because I think it fits within Buddhist.
Absolutely. Like, so many folks, working in activist realms, I saw a nice post a while back that was like, you want to help, the checklist kind of goes like this: give money, give time, encourage other people to give money, encourage other people to give time, and use your voice. Something like that, right? Like it's fairly straightforward. Activist movements need money and they need labor. And so find people that you can resonate with and join up, and whatever you can do, you do that. Yeah.
Tom Bruin had his hand up online.
Yeah. Tom, did you have a hand up, or?
I did.
Hey.
You sort of answered this, but it occurs to me that really what this comes down to is, protest and campaign against things, but without vilifying the people who are caught up in greed, hatred, and delusion. So it's more about campaigning against greed, basically, overall, against delusion, against hatred. But the playbook that we see play out is like, find a villain and protest, go after them. And I think it's because it feels more fruitful in the short term. Like, sure. Campaigning against hatred, that was something that Martin Luther King did his whole life. And, we're still not there,
Well, yes, and look how much good that did.
Right.
Right? Like, of course we're not there because there is no eradicating greed, hatred, and delusion from the world.
Right.
Yeah. This is not a Christian framework where at the end of time there's a battle between God and Satan and God wins. That's not the Buddha's metaphysics. Greed, hatred, and delusion are functionally eternal.
Yeah.
And so it's like saying that, campaigning out in the world against a villain, is like treating a symptom. You want to treat the symptoms of a cold, treat the symptoms, right? The only way to eradicate greed, hatred, and delusion completely is to do it in your own heart. Because you can't do it for anybody else. And it's not an external thing that you can fight against, right? It's not actually, greed, hatred, and delusion are not the mountain. The mountain is death, right? The thing that's threatening you is not greed, hatred, and delusion. That's a feature of the landscape. The thing that's threatening us is personal in a certain way and communal, is basic destruction. And so you do harm reduction, right? You take care of people as best you can, with the mountains encroaching. One of the funny things about the mountain simile, of course, is that the mountains are always approaching and they're always crushing whoever's like at the edge of town, the old people, right? You're old, you're dying, right? You're having accidents, you're dying. Death is always getting somebody, but it's never getting everybody. And so we're all actually constantly living under the threat of these encroaching mountains. This is not a momentary crisis. This is a permanent feature of existence. And so, it's important to remember that this isn't a crisis that gets solved. You don't solve the problem of death except in your own heart. It's the only place it can be solved because you can't solve it for anyone else other than by teaching the Dhamma. Right?
Thank you.
So you wake up and I try to wake up and we try to wake each other up and we try to wake the room up and we try to wake the world up because Buddhism is an answer to greed, hatred, and delusion that requires being spread. It requires us to say, hey, there's a different way and it involves not causing harm and, So yeah, protest against the villains because that helps prevent harm. That's harm. It's basic harm reduction. Protesting against the villains is harm reduction. Then you keep going with practicing your own heart and people say, oh, look, those Buddhists are protesting against the villains and they're doing it in a way where we can see that they are actually also unfolding their own hearts in a way that's wholesome. I want to hang out with those guys, and you start to stitch together the Sangha, the community of those who are well in heart, and in action. And you just do that forever.
Beautiful.
Yeah?
Thank you so much.
Right on. Good to have you.
Thank you, Sean. We have
All
to
right.
wrap up.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thanks, everybody. Blessings to y'all. Come on retreat, and I'll see you soon.
Yes. Come on retreat. Any announcements?
Yes, on your toast today. There's some snacks out in the lobby. If you use tea, you can just put your teacup in the sink. I might add that one of the snacks out there are Girl Scout cookies. It's a caramel something, but I feel like they may be one of the last organizations in the United States that hasn't been unwoked or un-DEI'd, so that's why they're out there. I will be passing around the Dana bowl. Dana is the Pali word for generosity, and that's what keeps our Sangha going, the rental of the space, an honorarium for our speakers. We have our newsletter, more on that later, that goes out quarterly to mostly incarcerated individuals. And also we are starting up our monthly dinners at the Larkin Street Youth Services. Clint's not here. Maybe Clint's on board somewhere, or maybe he's on Zoom, but I know that he's looking for, it's different. There's a new new director of the project there. So we're looking for a kind of core group of maybe 4 or 5 individuals that will be regulars doing it. And the reason for that is that you need to have like a TB test and fingerprinted, and so it's a bit more of a commitment. And then also eventually, once we get it going, other people can volunteer on a drop-in basis. But I know that Clint is looking for a core group of people. What else does Donna go to? I think I covered it all.
Retreats.
Oh yes, the retreats.
Speaking of which, as Sean mentioned, we're going to have a second annual spring retreat. It's 5 days long. If you want to take your practice deeper, it's at Vajrapani from April 23 to April 27. And it's a great retreat, I can tell you from personal experience. So you can sign up at gatebuddhist.org.
Thank you.
There's a sign-up sheet. I think probably everybody needs to sign up here, but there is a sign-up sheet. And I think I mentioned putting your cups in the sink. I'll take care of those. At 12:30, often people meet for lunch.
No.
But today, take it away, Jack.
All right. Last week we were not able to send out the newsletters for technical reasons, so we need to today. And I'd appreciate if a bunch of us would gather together after 3 minutes of chat, and so we can do that today. But actually, the number of prisoners, incarcerated people who are receiving the newsletter has diminished over the past year or so. There's a little bit more than 200. We used to send out over 300 or so. I don't know what the reason for that is, but those recipients which are still on the list are important to reach out to and connect with our Sangha. So please do that. Can I see hands of those who can? That's good.
Oh, good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Jim.
Yeah, that's nice. Breathtakingly great movie on Netflix called Will and Harper, about the road trip between Will Ferrell and a writer friend, SNL, who had become a woman. And it's unbelievably rich and authentic, and I highly recommend it.
Thank you. Any more announcements? Okay. Let's gather together for the dedication of merit.
By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives. Thanks, Dorothy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.